The Razee Saga. The Sword of Earth. Bastion dock turned like a crown of iron against the night, a slow and sovereign wheel above the moon where nations had once dreamed and now prepared for war. Admiral Buckrivers stood beneath the vault of the Razee's primary bay as the first wave of Cryon engineers and mechanics filed aboard. Bronze skin shimmering under floodlights, eyes wide with a craftsman's hunger, they moved with the quiet certainty of people who understood how energy bent and how metal remembered heat. Their insignia gleamed beside Earth's, a freshly forged crest shared between worlds. Earth's command had signed the Joint Crew Integration Accord at dawn. The words were dry and formal on paper but alive in steel here. Cryon officers accepted auxiliary commissions under Buckrivers, slotted into shields, plasma batteries, power routing, drone maintenance. Human chiefs kept their decks, their logs, their responsibility. Cryon savants brought harmonics and finesse no Earth hand yet possessed. Between them, a new language of the ship took shape. Rail and plasma, mass and light, layered fields humming in counterpoint along the Razee's spine. Across Dock Sector 7, a darker shape slipped from the shadows and into the grazing light of Earth. The Isabella cleared her cradles with predatory poise, hull drinking starlight, the cloaking lattice crawling like oil across glass. She was built without apology, a blade given engines, layered shielding stacked in cryon pulse and human brute redundancy. Missile bays sat sealed and cold with quiet, terrible promise. An EMP heart slept under armored ribs, a weapon that would wake once and decide battles by silence. Even in a harbor of giants she drew hush. On the Razee's marine decks the world trembled with a different rhythm. 5,000 space marines stood in ranks like a forest of steel, exocets whispering as servos breathed and plates settled. General Thomas Tudor walked the line without pomp, visor tucked under one arm, the other hand resting on a scabbard that held a bar of bottled sun. Scars laddered the plates of his suit where old heat had eaten paint and memory, and men and women straightened when he passed as if the ship itself took a fuller breath. Tudor did not look at cameras or the glowing holo stamped high overhead. He watched faces, counted eyes, measured fear and hunger and found his family ready. Cryon officers crossed the catwalk into marine country and paused. Here was a doctrine they had never needed, a science of flesh and courage rather than coils and lattices. They studied drop pods stacked like eggs under armored petals, saw the coupling rigs that would hitch Aegis shields to burning descent, listened as human armorers sang old cadence while plasma rifles took on their new cryon throats. By twilight cycle the Marines' blades burned hotter and their rifles bit deeper, and the cryon quartermasters, strangers no longer, laughed at the old superstition that children could not be taught war. On the command deck the holosphere opened to a cathedral of stars. Traffic beacons spun in tidy constellations around the dock as Orfat cryon freighters turned in, holds heavy with promise. Shipyard feeds rolled past like prayer flags, planetary batteries laid out in rings across Luna's far side. First drilling crews touching down on the slopes above Arcia Mons where Mars would grow a gun that could punch through night. The Concordia kept her vigil over cryon space with a steady pulse on the quantum line, a heartbeat that reached across light years to the desks and dark rooms of Spaceforce Command. The call came in the hour when even machines pretended to rest. A carrier wave spiked raw and ragged through the Bastion net, a frontier relay screaming against distance and interference until the message bled through in broken clarity. A world not yet charted on Earth's schoolhouse maps, a thin green lens of a planet on a red dwarf's leash, named by its own people with a word that meant harbor against storms. Raider marks flared across the upper air. Ground batteries were old and few. Cities were lifting their children into caves while the sky burned. The promise turned its face toward a new star. Orders rippled without fuss. The Aegis shield projectors cycled into descent coupling, their great cones retuned for planetary insertion. Drone racks on decks 9 and 10 woke like hives, swarms taking taskings faster than flesh could think. Hull patching, conduit remap, emergency field emitters prepositioned for a ship that would not be allowed to die. In engineering, a cryon chief whose fingers could hear current laid harmonics across the Razee's shield grid and smiled when the response came back clean. In gunnery, human crews ran their hands across rails that had saved worlds and felt the hum sink into bone. General Tudor's voice carried along corridors and into suit speakers where words were not needed to be believed. Secure the spaceports, lock the planetary guns, hold the civil corridors, clear the hospitals. If the fleet bled above, the ground would not break below. Marines moved to pods and practiced quiet, armor locking with a sound like distant surf. Plasma swords hung ready at hips, last words for when the rifles went silent. Bastion dock rolled its long shadow across the moon as the fleet turned outward. The Warhawk showed new plate where wreckage had once been daylight and vacuum. The Valiant's engines spun truer on Cryon bearings. The Cutlass stealth skin held a deeper night. The Razee's bays glowed with the light of 400 engines waiting for permission to roar. The Isabella slid into formation off the flagship's starboard like a hawk that tolerated no leash. Cryon voices folded into Earth's net as the fleet aligned. On the bridge, beside Buckrivers' chair, a Cryon liaison set a palm against a polished rail as if she could feel the ship's pulse and nodded once. Experience in the great currents of the galaxy had been lent to a newborn navy. Earth's command had judged correctly that wisdom given early was worth any price. Rivers felt the truth of it in the way the Razee's field settled, in the way gunnery solutions converged cleaner, in the way the ship seemed to breathe from deeper lungs. Clearance came from Bastion with the weight of a bell. The dock's cloaked sentinels shifted in the deep like whales turning. Planetary guns on Luna's rim tested new capacitors and wrote their names in a ledger that would only ever be opened when night fell for real. The Razee spoke to her sisters in pulses and in silence. Formations locked. Vectors painted. Fuel and fire accounted. Then the fleet cut its moorings to home and slid like knives into the sheath of faster-than-light. Stars climbed one another and became a river. The hull sang in a voice too low for ears but perfect for bone. Tudor stood in the dark of the drop hangar with his hand against the steel, feeling the distant thrum of engines through his palm, and understood why sailors had once named their ships she. In the engineering cathedrals, the Cryon chiefs listened for harmonics that meant grief and heard only readiness. In command, Buckrivers watched the promise he had spoken on another day stretch ahead like a road of cold fire. Transit broke like glass. A red sun punched through the window of the world. The planet lay ahead, small, fragile, threaded with aurora where raiders had torn at its sky. Enemy signatures multiplied like a sickness just above the air, and on the surface the map lit with a scatter of strongpoints that had to live or all the rest would die. There was no need to rehearse what came next. The Aegis rolled her shield over the descent corridor until atmosphere glowed and screamed, and under that burning dome the first pods fell like rain. Fighters peeled from the Razee in screaming arcs to lacerate the enemy screen. The Isabella drifted a breath beyond the edge of light and vanished, cloak swallowing her whole even as her main batteries drew breath in the dark. Earth and Cryon moved as one body, one will. The promise became motion. The sword slid from its scabbard. And the harbor against storms learned that the storm had brought a wall, and behind that wall came fire. The pods fell like burning meteors, their armored shells wrapped in fire as they knifed through atmosphere. 5,000 Marines descended in waves, each pod a coffin until its wings tore open and its jets screamed against gravity. General Thomas Tudor stood in the lead carrier, his exosuit locked into the restraints, plasma sword sheathed at his hip, rifle humming with readiness. Around him his men and women gripped their harnesses in silence, eyes burning with the weight of their first promise beyond Earth's soil. The sky outside was aflame. The Aegis shield stretched above them, a dome of light absorbing the storm of enemy fire. Plasma bolts hammered the barrier, splashing like waves against stone, but the wall did not break. In its shadow, the pods screamed downward unmolested, dropping straight into the maelstrom. Below, the planet's surface rose up in jagged mountains and fractured valleys. Cities huddled against cliff sides, their towers cracked and burning. Raider encampments sprawled across the plains, their structures ugly and jagged, bristling with plasma cannons that spat fire into the air. Civilians were being herded into pens at gunpoint, their cries carried on the winds. Tudor's jaw tightened as the terrain map lit his visor. These were not soldiers. These were wolves feasting on the helpless. Impact came like thunder. Pods slammed into the earth in synchronized arcs, their shells cracking open, disgorging steel giants into smoke and flame. The Marines poured out, exosuits gleaming, rifles spitting plasma bursts that cut raider lines apart. Tudor's voice boomed across the net, calm and steady as a tide. Secure the guns. Clear the corridors. Protect the people. The first battle lines erupted in chaos. Raiders shrieked as human plasma tore through their ranks, armor plates glowing white before bursting. Marines advanced in disciplined formations, shields interlocked, rifles singing. When weapons overheated or ran dry, blades hissed to life, molten edges cutting through flesh and steel alike. In the alleys of the city, exocets smashed through walls to reach trapped civilians, plasma swords sweeping corridors clear in arcs of light. Overhead the void thundered. The Razee unleashed her storm, rail batteries howling, missile bays vomiting fire into the swarm of raider ships that darkened orbit. Fighters poured from her hangars 400 strong, carving the skies in deadly arcs. The Warhawk and Valiant bracketed her flanks, guns roaring in support, while the Cutlass danced in shadow, loosing torpedoes into enemy hulls with surgical precision. But it was the Isabella that turned fear into awe. She slid through the cloak, her black hull drinking light, her outline flickering into view only when her main cannons fired. Blazing lances ripped through raider carriers, splitting them open in single shots. Then she vanished again, invisible in the void, firing unseen, her guns roaring from nowhere. Enemy formations shattered, their commanders howling in confusion, their sensors blind to the predator stalking them. Then came the weapon Earth had sworn to keep in reserve. On the Razee's command deck, Buckrivers watched as a raider dreadnought rose from hyperspace, dwarfing its escorts, its prow bristling with guns aimed straight at the Aegis. If its first volley struck, the shield wall would collapse and every marine on the ground would be exposed. He weighed the choice, felt the weight of his oath. Then he gave the order. Isabella, fire the spear. The warship shifted, her cloak rippling, her prow lowering like the head of a predator. Energy built in her core, massive and unstable, until the void itself seemed to bend around her hull. Then she unleashed the EMP. A wave of blue light rippled outward, silent, invisible to the eye until it struck. The raider dreadnought shuddered. Its guns dimmed. Its shields cracked. Its engines guttered and died. One by one its escorts followed, the entire formation going dark in the span of a heartbeat. Dead hulks drifted helplessly, silent prey for Earth's gunners. The Isabella's lights flickered, her systems straining under the cost of the strike. She would need time to recharge, to breathe. But one shot had decided the void. On the ground, the Marines felt the heavens open above them as raider fire ceased. Tudor raised his sword, its blade burning like a second sun, and his voice carried over the din. Forward. Push them back. Let them know Earth stands with the helpless. The promise became steel in their hands, fire in their blades. Step by step, corridor by corridor, they took the city back. And in orbit, Buckrivers stood at the heart of the storm, watching enemy wreckage burn against the stars, the Razee's guns still thundering, the Isabella a shadow waiting for her next strike. The galaxy would hear of this battle. They would whisper that the children of Earth had brought not only fleets, but warriors who fought with the ferocity of gods. For the first time, Earth was not merely answering a cry for help. Earth was showing the galaxy what it meant to keep a promise with both shield and sword. The streets of the frontier world burned. Smoke twisted between broken towers, ash rained from the sky, and the ground shook under the constant hammer of plasma fire. General Thomas Tudor marched at the head of his Marines, his exocet glowing where cryon shield harmonics bent raider bolts into arcs of wasted light. His plasma rifle roared in his gauntlets, every burst carving lines through enemy barricades. When the magazine burned empty, he drew his sword, a beam of molten brilliance that seared through steel and flesh alike. His men surged behind him, armored giants advancing in unbreakable phalanxes, their boots crushing broken stone as they pressed deeper into the city. The mission map glowed in his visor. 3 objectives: the orbital defense guns at the edge of the capital, the civilian tunnels burrowed beneath the eastern cliffs, and the central spire where raiders had turned the government halls into a fortress. Tudor divided his forces, sending entire battalions into each corridor, drop pods still slamming into the ground as reserves poured down from orbit. The Marines moved with precision, squads peeling off to cover alleyways, drones darting overhead, their optics feeding real-time data into the command net. Every corridor became a crucible. Raiders fought with wild ferocity, hurling themselves against exocets that outmatched them in every way. Still, they swarmed, waves of flesh and plasma forcing close combat where teeth and claws slashed at armored plates. Marines answered with rifles and blades, fighting shoulder to shoulder, every line held by the weight of discipline and the steel of their will. Above, the sky thundered. Admiral Buckrivers stood on the Razee's command deck as new signatures flared across the holomap. Reinforcements. A second raider fleet, smaller than the Zorith Armadas but still heavy enough to crush a world left unguarded. They were moving fast, engines screaming, weapons hot. If they broke through, they would land fire directly on Tudor's Marines. Rivers did not hesitate. He ordered the fleet to intercept. The Warhawk and Valiant surged forward, their scars from Cryon still visible but their gunnery sharper than ever. The Cutlass vanished into shadow, her stealth plating bending light as she moved to harass the enemy flanks. The Aegis poured more energy into the atmospheric shield, protecting the descent corridor as if her very heart was stretched over the planet itself. And the Isabella slid out of cloak again, her cannons roaring, splitting a carrier into two burning halves before she vanished back into darkness. The first volleys shook the system. Rail shells ripped through escorts, missiles streaked in swarms, fighters tangled in whirling arcs of fire. The Razee's great guns fired in thunderous cadence, skyscraper-sized rounds turning enemy cruisers into ruin. But for every enemy shattered, another pressed forward. Rivers leaned into the holomap, his voice iron. "Hold the line. The Marines are counting on us." On the ground, Tudor's Marines breached the first stronghold. The eastern cliffs shook as armored squads stormed the tunnels, their rifles blazing, clearing passage after passage until thousands of civilians poured into safety behind them. In the west, exocets tore down enemy barricades around the orbital gun emplacements, engineers rushing in behind to seize controls. Cryon specialists worked side by side with human techs, fingers dancing across consoles as they brought the great cannons online, their barrels rising like the spines of titans. The central spire was the hardest fight. Raiders had dug in with heavy plasma cannons, their towers bristling with fire. Tudor led the assault himself, storming through the barricades with his command company. His sword cut a path through glowing debris, his rifle roared until it melted in his hands, and his Marines surged like an avalanche. Room by room, hall by hall, they cleared the fortress, their blades singing against steel. At the highest chamber, Tudor raised his sword, its glow casting long shadows across the blood-slick floor. The spire was theirs. Outside, the orbital guns roared to life. Great lances of plasma fire streaked upward, slamming into raider ships that had pierced the fleet's line. Enemy cruisers shattered, escorts burned, formations scattered in panic. From orbit, Rivers watched the cannons strike and allowed himself a rare smile. The planet itself had become a weapon now, part of the fleet, part of the fight. The battle stretched into hours. Blood and fire marked every street, wreckage drifted in orbit, and still the promise held. Marines held the ground, the fleet held the skies, and together they drove the raiders back into the dark. Last silence came. The last enemy ship fled into hyperspace, limping, its fleet broken. On the surface, the last barricade fell, Marines raising their banners above the shattered spire. Civilians poured into the streets, their cheers rising in ragged voices, their eyes wide as they looked upon the armored giants who had fought for them. They whispered a new name, one that would spread across the galaxy: Earth's Angels of Fire. In orbit, Rivers watched the map flicker clean of red signatures. His officers exhaled as one, exhaustion heavy on every face. But he knew this was only another step, another echo. Cryon had been the first ally. This world would not be the last. And already the galaxy stirred, waiting to test Earth again. The promise had been kept once more. And with every battle, the sword grew sharper. The smoke had barely cleared when the people emerged. They stumbled out of the tunnels and shattered districts, their faces streaked with soot, their clothes torn, their eyes wide with the disbelief of survival. Children clung to mothers, elders leaned on shattered canes, and all of them gazed upward when the banners of Earth and Cryon were raised together above the spire. In the silence that followed the battle's last thunder, hope returned in their voices. Admiral Buckrivers descended with an honor guard of Marines, his boots crunching on broken stone as he walked through the streets. General Thomas Tudor waited at the spire's base, his exocet still scarred from plasma fire, his great sword sheathed but glowing faintly in the dusk. When the two men clasped hands, the civilians around them erupted in cheers that shook the ruins. For the first time, these people knew the promise was not myth. It was living steel. Inside the gutted council chamber, what remained of the planet's leaders gathered. Their bodies were tall and lithe, their skin pale with exhaustion, their robes charred from smoke. They bowed deeply to Rivers and Tutor, their voices carrying both gratitude and desperation. You came when no one else did. The Federation did not answer. The empires did not stir. Only Earth stood with us. We ask not for conquest but for protection. Bind us to you as Cryon is bound. Let us give what we can so that the next cry may not come too late. The offer was clear. Another defensive pact, another ally added to Earth's growing circle. Minerals and food supplies, orbital bases along the frontier, and technology born from centuries of surviving on the edge of Federation neglect. Their engineers had perfected ground-based power capacitors capable of amplifying planetary guns far beyond their design. They offered this to Earth freely as part of the pact. Rivers nodded slowly, the weight heavy in his chest. Each new promise fulfilled bound Earth tighter to the galaxy's fate. But it was not his to give alone. He activated the secure line, the Concordia's quantum relay bridging light years in an instant. Back on Earth, in the war chambers of Space Force Command, admirals and generals listened in silence as Rivers spoke. He described the battle, the Marines' valor, the orbital guns turning the tide. He spoke of the planet's plea, of their willingness to share resources and technology. And he invoked the same words he had spoken at Cryon. The promise is not safe, but it is right. The response came after a long silence. Space Force Command authorized the pact. The planet would be defended under the banner of Earth's promise, and Earth would accept their gifts into the growing arsenal. The Concordia descended to orbit and sealed the pact in law. Marines stood guard as civilians cheered, their voices echoing in the ruined streets, the banners of Earth unfurled beside their own. But even as celebration filled the capital, darkness stirred beyond the system. On the Razee's command deck, Rivers watched as new signals bled into the net, long-range intercepts from Cryon listening posts. Zorith fleet movements. Not scattered patrols, not raids. Entire armadas gathering at the borders, their numbers far beyond what Earth had yet faced. Their vengeance was coming, sharpened by humiliation, fueled by hatred. General Tutor joined him on the deck, his armor scorched but his eyes steady. His Marines had fought like lions, but even he knew 5,000 would be little against the tide to come. He looked at Rivers, his voice low, heavy with the truth both men felt. They'll come for us, Buck. Not just with claws but with teeth enough to tear worlds apart. Rivers stared into the holomap, the red tide swelling across sectors like blood spreading through water. His jaw tightened. The promise had been kept again and Earth had gained another ally. But the cost of keeping it was about to rise beyond anything they had yet endured. For the Zorith were coming. And this time they would bring war enough to test not just the promise, but the very survival of Earth itself. The Bastion dock turned in silence above Earth, its armored rings alight with construction. Massive scaffolds cradled the beginnings of planetary cannons meant for Luna's far side, while Mars' red ridges shook with the roar of drill rigs sinking foundations for fortress batteries. Drones swarmed like constellations, welding, sealing, birthing weapons the solar system had never imagined. Earth was no longer only building ships, it was building a wall across the heavens. And from that forge came something new. When Admiral Buckrivers returned to Bastion with the Razee and Isabella, command ordered him to the dock's deepest bay. The armored gates parted and a shadow drifted into the light. The Warhammer-class battleship GMS Skuta V. She was unlike anything Earth had dared build before. Her armor was layered in tiers, Earth's strongest alloys fused with cryon resonance fields. Plasma fire would splash harmlessly across her skin. Even hypervelocity slugs would bury themselves shallow and fail to pierce her heart. Her flanks bristled with heavy batteries, broadside turrets arranged in ranks like ancient legions. And her prow carried Earth's newest weapon, laser cannons designed in partnership with Cryon engineers, coherent beams so focused they could scythe through shields like cloth. The Skuta V moved forward under her own engines, the hum of her reactors deep and steady, felt even through the dock's hull. Compared to her, even the Razee looked slender, the Isabella lean and predatory. Where Isabella was shadow and strike, Skuta V was a hammer, a wall of steel that could not be ignored. Rivers stood on the Razee's command deck as she joined formation. The officers around him whispered in awe, faces washed in the glow of the newcomer's silhouette. The fleet was no longer only promise and strike. Now it carried judgment. General Thomas Tudor arrived from the marine decks, his exosuit polished though still scarred, his expression as steady as iron. His gaze lingered on the massive battleship drifting into place. His voice rumbled low, almost to himself. "She'll hold, Admiral. Whatever the Zorith bring, she'll take it and hit harder." On the engineering decks, human crews and cryon specialists worked side by side, tuning the SyFy's reactors, calibrating her laser harmonics, sealing her armor in layered resonance fields. Their voices blended, no longer strangers, the work of two peoples becoming one. The cryon had brought finesse, Earth had brought brute force, and together they had built a weapon that would shape wars. Space Force Command transmitted the formal orders. Task Force Genesis was no longer a single fleet. With the Razee, the Isabella, the SyFy, and their escorts, it had become Earth's first expeditionary armada. And Buckrivers, admiral of the fleet, would command it all. He studied the holomap. The Zorith fleets were no longer whispers. Whole armadas gathered at the borders, a crimson tide swelling. They were coming not for raids, not for spoils, but for vengeance. The Razee would carry the promise. The Isabella would strike unseen. The SyFy would hold the line and crush what came. And the Marines would descend where no ship could reach, fire and steel on the ground. For the first time, Buckrivers felt the scale of the storm to come. Humanity had drawn its sword. Soon the galaxy would see how sharp it truly was. The warning came from cryon relays 3 days after the SyFy joined formation. The intercepts were clear, no longer whispers but hard numbers painted in crimson across the holomap. Zorith fleets, not raiders, not patrols but armadas. Dozens of carriers, lines of cruisers, a tide of warships so vast their signatures bled across sectors like wildfire. They were moving with purpose, and their purpose was Earth. On the Razee's command deck, Admiral Buckrivers stood with his senior officers, cryon liaisons at their stations, their bronze skin gleaming faint in the holomap's light. General Tudor stood off his shoulder, exosuit plates scarred and silent, visor tucked beneath one arm. The room was still but for the hum of systems, the gravity of the report sinking like lead. The Zorith were coming. Rivers' voice cut through the weight like steel. Then we meet them before they touch Earth. We hold the line at the frontier. Task Force Genesis sails now. The fleet surged from Bastion dock in full battle readiness. Fighters filled the hangars, Marines strapped into pods, plasma coils glowed with stored charge. The Razee led in silence, her engines burning like a beacon. Beside her, the Isabella drifted in and out of cloak, a predator's shadow waiting to strike. And on her port flank, the SyFy loomed, her armor gleaming, her laser batteries glowing faint like coals before a storm. Behind them, the Warhawk and Valiant slid proud despite their scars. The Cutlass vanished into darkness, and the Aegis pulsed steady, her shields tuned to the fleet. Transit tore and folded, and the Armada broke into real space above the frontier system. The stars lit red. The Zorith had arrived. The enemy fleet sprawled across the void, a wall of obsidian steel, jagged and bristling with guns. Their banners burned crimson, their signals filled the calm with guttural oaths of vengeance. At their heart loomed a flagship the size of a city, its hull etched with scars from wars older than Earth's recorded history. Its guns glowed, hungry for fire. The Razee's orders spread through the fleet like lightning. Warhawk and Valiant to the flanks. Aegis forward. Isabella, vanish and wait. SyFy, hold the line with me. Marines stand by for ground deployment. The Zorith fired first. Plasma lances streaked across the void, a wall of green fire slamming into the Aegis shield dome. The barrier rippled, bent, but held. Then Earth answered. The SyFy roared. Her broadside cannons opened in a rolling thunder, each laser beam cutting through shields like cloth, each rail slug smashing into hulls with devastating mass. Entire Zorith escorts were carved apart in seconds, their wreckage spinning into the abyss. Where the Isabella was a knife in the dark, the SyFy was a hammer, and with every strike the enemy line broke further. The Razee unleashed her fighters, hundreds of ships screaming into the void, missiles streaking, kinetic rounds slamming into cruisers. The Warhawk and Valiant fired in tandem, their volleys crossing in arcs of destruction. The Cutlass struck from shadow, torpedoes gutting engines, leaving prey helpless for the hammer to crush. And then the Isabella appeared within the enemy's flank, her cannons firing point-blank before she vanished again, a phantom that left only wreckage in her wake. But still the Zorith pressed forward, their numbers overwhelming. The flagship's prow lit with terrible power, a weapon-building energy beyond anything Earth had yet seen. On the ground below, their landing craft broke away, streaking for the surface to secure strong points and bleed the planet beneath. General Tudor slammed his visor into place, his voice steady across the marine net. Pods ready. Drop in the shadow of the wall. Secure the guns, hold the cities. The fleet will bleed above us. We will not fail them. The Marines' pods slammed into place along their rails, thousands of armored giants locking in silence, plasma rifles humming in their gauntlets, swords glowing like contained suns. The Aegis shifted, her shield dome spreading to cover the descent corridor, even as her hull screamed under the storm. On the Razee, Rivers gripped the rail as the holomap flickered red with enemy signatures. The SyFy's lasers burned bright, cutting swathes through the tide. The Isabella's cloak rippled, waiting for her moment to strike. The Marines were locked and ready. And still the enemy came. This would not be a skirmish. Not even a battle. This would be war in its truest shape. A test not only of ships, not only of swords, but of whether Earth's promise could survive the storm of an empire's wrath. The order came from Rivers' lips with no hesitation. All batteries. All fighters. Marines, drop. The sky lit with fire. The pods fell through fire once again, streaks of burning metal carving through the atmosphere. But this time not all pods carried for the surface. Some broke formation, angling upward instead of down, guided by precise vectors from the Razee. General Thomas Tudor's voice cut through the marine net. New orders. We're not just taking ground today, we're taking their teeth. Boarding teams with me. Exocets locked into pod harnesses. Marines braced as the descent burned around them. Then the pods split and flared their course. Instead of striking Earth, they slammed into the hulls of Zorith warships. Explosive charges tore steel open and armored giants poured into the void. Plasma rifles barked, plasma swords hissed, and the corridors of the enemy burned. The Zorith never expected this. They fought like animals in the dark, but the Marines pressed forward in formation, shields interlocked, blades carving through decks. Power conduits crackled, gun crews were cut down before they could fire. Command chambers fell in storms of plasma fire. Tudor himself led the first breach, his sword a sun in the black, his voice steady as he cut a path through resistance. Secure the bridge. Turn their guns on their own. And they did. One ship after another fell to Earth's hammermen, their command decks taken, their controls ripped from enemy hands. Marine engineers slammed emergency codes into consoles, overriding failsafes, forcing captured ships into Earth's net. The Razee's holomap lit as red icons blinked green, enemy cruisers turning their guns outward, firing into their former fleet. The Zorith howled in confusion as their own vessels betrayed them, burning holes in their own lines. Above the chaos, the SyFy anchored the line. Her broadside cannons thundered, laser beams carving through the dark, tearing apart enemy escorts in waves. Her armor shrugged off volley after volley, her resonance fields humming steady. She was the hammer and every strike broke bones. The Isabella flickered in and out of cloak, her missiles and cannons ripping through the gaps created by the boarded ships. She moved like a phantom, striking from nowhere, vanishing again before the Zorith could respond. Entire wings collapsed in panic, their formations broken, their command net shattered by betrayal within. On the Razee, Rivers stood tall, watching the holomap tilt in Earth's favor. His voice carried iron through the comms. Keep pressure. Don't let them regroup. This is where the promise stands or breaks. But the enemy flagship still loomed, its prow glowing with the slow, dreadful build of its superweapon. Plasma energy gathered in a lattice vast enough to shatter a fleet in one strike. If it fired, the shield wall would collapse, the Marines would be vaporized, and the battle lost. Rivers' jaw set. Isabella, prepare the spear. SyFy, hold that fire. Razee, all guns to bear. The fleet shifted, focusing everything on the looming Titan. Captured Zorith ships fired into their former master. Marines holding the bridges long enough to unleash full broadsides before self-destructing in fire. The SyFy's laser cannons cut into the flagship's armor, carving glowing scars across its hull. The Razee thundered with her skyscraper-sized rounds, each impact shaking the monster but not breaking it. And then the Isabella uncloaked within its shadow, her prow already glowing with unstable energy. Her EMP spear ignited in silence, a pulse of light that rippled across the void. Shields flickered and collapsed, systems died in cascades of sparks. The flagship shuddered like a wounded beast. In that heartbeat of weakness, the Skuda V and Razee fired as one. Rail slugs and laser beams slammed into the flagship's spine, shattering its core, splitting its reactors. The great beast tore apart in silence, its burning halves scattering into the void. The battle turned. The Zorith fleet faltered, its command destroyed, its own ships firing in betrayal, Earth's marines tearing through corridors, planting charges, securing bridges. One by one, enemy signatures winked out, until the void was filled with wreckage and fire, the promise of vengeance broken. On the enemy decks, Tudor raised his sword in a captured command chamber, its light casting long shadows across a room littered with broken bodies. His voice rumbled through the net. Ships secured. Guns turned. The promise holds. In orbit, Rivers exhaled as the holomap cleared of red. His fleet stood bloodied but unbroken. The Razee scarred, the Skuda V battered but unyielding, the Isabella drained but alive, the Aegis still glowing steady. And among them, enemy ships now flying Earth's signal, proof of what Marines could do with steel and fury. The galaxy would hear of this day. That Earth's fleets could hold the line. That Earth's Marines could board and take what others thought untouchable. That Earth's promise was not only shield, it was fire, it was hammer, it was sword. The void was silent once more, filled only with wreckage drifting in cold arcs, fire blooming here and there as atmosphere vented from broken hulls. Task Force Genesis stood bloodied but alive, the Razee's guns smoking, the Skuda V scarred along her flanks, the Isabella drained but cloaked again in quiet shadow. Marines signaled all clear from the captured Zorith ships, their banners lowered, their decks littered with ash. Admiral Buckrivers gave the order, his voice steady though every officer on the command deck felt the weight. Secure the wounded. Pull back to Bastion. We will need the docks walls before the next wave comes. The fleet fell into formation, battered but unbroken. Captured Zorith ships slid into line, their hulls cracked, their systems barely holding, but under Marine guard they moved in silence. Drones from the Aegis swarmed across their flanks, patching ruptures, rerouting power, holding them together for the long transit home. The Concordia relayed ahead, her quantum net humming, warning Bastion dock to prepare for the greatest intake in its short history. When they broke transit above Earth, the dock's gates yawned wide. Armored arms reached out, guiding the wounded in. Repair drones poured like rivers of steel, Cryon specialists leading them with voices sharp and quick, their long fingers dancing over consoles. Where human engineers welded and bolted, Cryon drones reformed alloy like clay, knitting broken hulls whole again. The seized ships were pulled into the dock's inner yards. Their alien hulls still hissed with smoke, their decks scarred, their corridors littered with the signs of Marine boarding actions. Yet already Cryon repair swarms crawled their surfaces, their emitters glowing faint as they wove strange alloys into human docking arms. Marines stood guard as engineers entered, pulling apart panels, tracing circuits, mapping systems no human had ever touched. It was in those systems that they found the secret. The Zorith had layered their shields differently than Earth or Cryon had ever considered. A triphase lattice, overlapping but fragile when disrupted at precise frequencies. Cryon scientists explained it in harmonics and energy flow, but to human gunners it meant something simpler. If you struck in rhythm, if volleys landed at just the right intervals, the lattice collapsed instantly. What had seemed indestructible could be made brittle as glass. Rivers stood in the dock's council chamber as the findings were presented. Engineers and Cryon specialists spread hollow diagrams across the table, red lines marking weaknesses, green pulses showing the exact cadence that would bring shields down. The Skuda V's laser cannons could be tuned to those frequencies. The Razee's rails could provide the rhythm. Even the Isabella, in cloak, could strike in sequence to shatter defenses before the enemy knew what was happening. General Tudor listened in silence, his visor tucked beneath one arm, his Marines standing rigid at his back. When the explanation ended, he leaned forward, his voice heavy with iron. Then we've taken more than their ships. We've taken their armor. Next time we'll cut deeper. Repairs surged day and night. The Razee's hull was patched, her hangars reloaded, her fighters refueled. The Skuta V received reinforcement along her scarred armor, her reactors recalibrated with cryon resonance fields. The Isabella was drawn into a cloaked cradle, her systems recharged, her EMP lattice refitted for another strike. And the captured Zorith ships, 6 in total, were stripped, rebuilt, and recommissioned. Their jagged silhouettes still bore the shape of the enemy, but now they carried Earth's signals and Earth's promise. In the dock's deepest bay, Marines walked their decks as conquerors, reminding the galaxy that Earth could not only defend but seize what was thrown against it. Cryon drones moved ceaselessly across their hulls, their harmonics bending steel into strength, their optics glowing faint in the dark. Rivers stood on the command deck of the Razee as the fleet gathered once more, green icons blinking steady on the holomap. His officers were weary, their eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, but they carried something new: certainty. The Zorith had struck with fury and failed. Their shields were no longer impenetrable. Their fleets were no longer invincible. Earth had learned their secret, and the next battle would not be fought blind. But the galaxy was vast and vengeance was patient. Already reports came from the frontier. Zorith signals moving again. More fleets massing. An empire refusing to accept humiliation. The promise had been kept. The shield had held. The sword had struck. And now Earth carried the enemy's weapons in its own hands. The next storm was coming. And this time Earth would meet it with fire that the galaxy had never dreamed possible. The call came like thunder through the Concordia's quantum net. Cryon 5 was under siege again. The Zorith had returned, not with raiders nor scouting lines, but with an armada worthy of vengeance. Their fleets poured into Cryon orbit in a tide of black steel, banners burning crimson, weapons already raining fire onto the cities below. Admiral Buckrivers stood on the Razee's command deck as the signal pulsed through. The holomap filled with red, more ships than even Cryon's first battle, their formation precise, their fury sharpened by humiliation. This time they meant to break Cryon, not bleed it. If Cryon fell, Earth's first promise would be shattered, and the galaxy would believe the Sapiens could be broken. But Rivers had prepared for this. The fleet surged into formation as the Armada left Bastion dock. The Razee at the center, her hangars spilling fighters into readiness. The Skuta V to port, her laser batteries glowing like a wall of fire. The Isabella slipping into cloak, vanishing into the void. The Aegis rolling her shields forward, the Warhawk and Valiant bracketing her flanks. Marines strapped into pods, their exocets humming, General Tudor walking their lines with his steady hand. And behind them, hidden in silence, came the stolen Zorith ships. Rebuilt at Bastion, their jagged hulls disguised in Cryon cloak arrays, their signals tuned to mimic their enemy. They drifted on silent vectors, ghosting through the void, holding their fire as the battle opened. Transit tore, and the first expeditionary armada erupted into Cryon space. The Zorith were waiting. A wall of fire slammed into the fleet, plasma lances thick enough to blind sensors, energy storms so vast they burned against the Aegis shields. The wall flickered, buckled, but held. Fighters screamed from the Razee, missiles streaked, rails thundered. Skuta V opened her broadsides, laser beams slicing through shields, rail shells carving ships apart. The Isabella uncloaked inside the flank, fired her cannons point blank, then vanished again into shadow. The battle raged, titanic, the void filled with wreckage and fire. But still the Zorith pressed, their numbers heavy, their flagship driving hard toward Cryon's capital. The Razee's officers felt the tide swelling, pressure mounting, the line bending under sheer weight. Rivers stood unmoving, his jaw iron, his eyes on the map. He had been waiting for this moment. He gave the order in a single word. Unleash. From the shadows, the stolen ships moved. Cloaks peeled away like smoke, jagged silhouettes blazing into the light. But their guns no longer answered to the Zorith. They answered to Earth. Their broadsides erupted in fire, rail slugs and plasma cannons tearing into the enemy from behind. Entire squadrons of Zorith ships were gutted in seconds, their formations collapsing in confusion. Commanders screamed into broken nets, unsure who betrayed them, their lines fracturing under the weight of fire from their own stolen steel. The ambush tore the Armada apart. Skuta V fired into the chaos, her beams slicing through ships left exposed. The Razee's fighters swarmed into the gaps, their missiles carving crippled hulls into debris. The Isabella struck unseen, her EMP lattice flashing once more, silencing an entire wing in a single breath. Marines boarded crippled ships, their blades and rifles clearing decks, turning more guns inward. In orbit below, Cryon cities looked up into the skies and saw fire rain down not upon them but upon their enemy. For the first time, the galaxy's people saw Zorith fleets shattered not by overwhelming force, but by cunning, by guile, by the hand of sapiens who fought not only with steel but with wit. On the Razee's command deck, Rivers stood as the holomap bloomed green, red icons winking out in clusters. His officers cheered, voices rising in relief, but he only nodded once, his voice steady. Hold formation. Finish this. Let them know Earth keeps its word. Hours later, the battlefield was silent again. The Zorith had fled, their flagship shattered, their armada gutted by betrayal they had never imagined possible. Cryon stood free once more, its skies lit not by fire, but by banners of Earth and its allies. General Tudor reported from the captured decks, his armor blackened, his voice calm. The enemy's guns are ours. Their pride is broken. The promise holds. And in the dark beyond Cryon, the galaxy listened. They whispered of children no longer. They whispered of sapiens who turned enemies into weapons, who fought with sword, shield, and fire. Some whispered of saviors, others of conquerors. But all agreed on one thing: Earth could no longer be ignored. From the Bastion dock, alarms rang through armored halls, their echoes carried across Earth's quantum net. Civilian traffic was cleared from orbit, colonies on Luna and Mars sealed their shelters, and deep bunkers beneath Earth itself thrummed with readiness drills. The Concordia relayed every whisper from Cryon scouts, every intercepted Zorith signal. The storm was coming, and this time it was aimed at humanity's home. On the command deck of the Razee, Admiral Buckrivers stood before the holomap, its surface burning crimson. The Zorith Armada had entered the Oort cloud, their formation vast enough to blot out the stars. Hundreds of warships, carriers, cruisers, dreadnoughts, converging on the fragile worlds of humankind. They came with vengeance, and they came to break the promise at its heart. The first expeditionary armada stood ready. The Razee at the center, her hangars filled with 400 fighters prepped for launch. The Isabella cloaked, prowling unseen. The Scuda V beside her, armor scarred but unyielding, laser batteries humming with stored charge. The Aegis rolled her shields wide, her resonance fields tuned to protect the fleet's heart. The Warhawk and Valiant bristled with their heavy guns, the Cutlass already vanished into shadow. Behind them loomed 6 captured Zorith warships, their jagged hulls disguised under Cryon cloaks, waiting for the moment to strike again. General Thomas Tudor moved among his Marines in the Razee's drop bays, his great plasma sword hanging at his side, his voice steady as stone. This is our home. Behind us are our families, our cities, our world. There is no line beyond this one. Hold it, and we prove the promise unbreakable. The Zorith broke into real space in a storm of fire. Plasma lances streaked across the void, striking at long range, splashing against the Aegis shields in waves. Their formations spread like wings, their flagship burning crimson, prow aimed straight at Earth. The comm channels filled with guttural roars of vengeance. Children of Earth, today you burn. Rivers did not flinch. He gave the order, his voice carrying through every deck. All ships engage. Fighters launch. The line will hold. The battle erupted. The Razee opened with her rail guns, skyscraper-sized rounds streaking into the dark, smashing through the first Zorith escorts. Fighters poured from her bays, swarming like a storm of steel, missiles streaking into enemy lines. The Scuda V's broadsides thundered, laser beams scything across the void, cutting through shields, carving cruisers apart. The Isabella uncloaked inside the flank, her cannons firing point blank, splitting a carrier in two before vanishing again. But the Zorith did not falter. Their numbers pressed forward, their flagship's weapons growing brighter, charging for a shot meant to cripple Bastion dock itself. Plasma fire hammered the Aegis until her shields screamed, bolts slamming against resonance fields with the force of suns. The Warhawk and Valiant fought side by side, trading blow for blow, their armor peeling, their gunners firing until their barrels burned. On the ground below, Cities trembled as fire streaked across the sky. Civilians huddled in shelters, watching from beneath steel and soil as the heavens burned with their defenders' fury. The fleet bent but did not break. Yet Rivers knew the weight was too great. The Armada was massive, the enemy's flagship charging its weapon. If Earth's fleet fought alone, the line would crack. He gave the command that would turn the battle. Activate planetary defense grid. From Luna's far side, colossal rail guns rose from craters, cloaks peeling away as their barrels locked into firing arcs. Mars ridges split open, plasma cannons hidden beneath mountains lifting toward the void. Orbital gun platforms, disguised as abandoned satellites, lit with power, their missile silos opening like steel flowers. The Zorith did not see them until they fired. The solar system erupted. Lunar railguns hurled tungsten rods into space, their mass striking with the force of meteor impacts, tearing Zorith cruisers apart in single blows. Mars plasma cannons lanced the void, beams of molten fire punching through shields, gutting warships in arcs of white. Orbital platforms vomited missile swarms into the enemy flanks, detonations scattering formations, shattering coordination. For the first time in the galaxy's history, Earth itself had fired back. On the Razee's deck, Rivers' voice cut through the storm. Hold formation. Let them feel what it means to strike at our home. The battle was far from won. The Zorith flagship still loomed, its weapon charging, its escorts pressing. But the first surprise had been revealed. Earth's solar system was no longer defenseless. It was a fortress and its guns were awake. And the enemy had just learned what it meant to fight humanity at its home. The solar system shook with fire. Luna's rail guns thundered again, their rods smashing through cruisers with unstoppable force. Mars batteries blazed like volcanoes, hurling plasma into the void. Orbital platforms detonated wave after wave of missiles, tearing swaths through enemy lines. Still the Zorith pressed on, their sheer numbers grinding forward. A tide of black steel determined to drown Earth in its own cradle. The Aegis staggered as a wall of plasma slammed into her shields, the resonance fields screaming under strain. The Warhawk and Valiant fought like wolves, their flanks torn open but their guns still roaring, each volley punching holes in the enemy's wings. The Isabella appeared in a flash of fire, gutted a dreadnought with point-blank cannons, then cloaked again before counterfire could strike her. At the center, the Skuda V held the line. Her layered armor burned bright, plasma splashing harmlessly against her resonance fields. Her laser cannons cut deep, each beam scything across the dark, carving through shields that moments before had seemed invincible. Every broadside was thunder, every strike a hammer. She did not bend. But the Zorith flagship loomed closer. Its prow burned crimson, the glow of its weapon growing brighter with every passing second. If it fired, the Bastion dock would fall. And if Bastion fell, Earth would stand naked. On the Razee's command deck, Admiral Buckrivers stood tall, his voice steady though the deck trembled. Bastion. No. The dock answered. Hidden panels peeled away across its armored rings, revealing cannons the galaxy had never seen. Cloaked silos opened, their missiles laced with nuclear fury. Massive rail batteries rose from beneath armored plating, each barrel longer than entire warships. And from its core, a lance of energy brighter than any star began to burn. Bastion dock fired. Rail slugs screamed across the void, smashing through the Zorith flagship's escorts, tearing them to molten debris. Nuclear missiles detonated in blossoms of fire, wiping out entire wings in incandescent fury. And the energy lance, a beam of pure annihilation, struck the flagship's shields and ripped through them as if they were paper, carving a glowing wound across its prow. The enemy faltered, stunned, their formations scattering under the weight of Earth's hidden fortress. But before they could recover, Rivers gave the second command. Cloak teams, strike. From the shadows of the void, the captured Zorith ships revealed themselves. Their cloaks peeled away like smoke, their guns already burning with stolen fire. They came in from the flanks, cutting straight into the enemy's rear, their broadsides roaring. Plasma cannons and rail batteries opened in unison, gutting cruisers and carriers from behind. The Zorith never expected it. Their lines collapsed in chaos, commanders screaming into broken nets as their own warships betrayed them again. Some tried to turn, but the Isabella struck in their confusion, uncloaking inside their heart, unleashing her EMP spear. An entire wing went silent, drifting helpless, their systems dead. The Skuta V hammered the survivors, her beams scything, her rails smashing, her broadside shaking the system. From the spires of Luna, Mars, and the dock itself, civilians watched the skies alight with fire. What had begun as terror became awe, as they saw the Sapiens not only survive but dominate. The Zorith Armada, so vast it had blotted the stars, was breaking apart in Earth's sky. On the Razee's deck, River's jaw tightened as the holomap lit with green-red icons vanishing one after another. This was the moment. His voice was steady iron. Press the attack. Do not let them escape. General Tudor's Marines dropped into crippled ships again, seizing command decks, turning enemy guns outward. Bastion's lances fired once more, splitting carriers open. And the Skuta V delivered her final broadside, a wall of fire that shattered the Zorith flagship's core. The Titans split apart, burning halves drifting helpless toward the gravity well. The fleet followed, scattering into wreckage and flame. The solar system was safe. Bastion Dock still stood. And for the first time, Earth had not merely survived the storm, it had broken the storm itself. But River's gaze did not soften. He looked at the wreckage burning above Earth, at the cheers echoing across every channel, and he knew the truth. The Zorith had been broken again, but their empire would not stop. They would call allies. They would rally other powers. The galaxy was watching, and Earth had shown too much strength to ever be ignored again. And in the halls of Space Force Command, plans were already unfolding. A second Bastion-class fortress, not above Earth but above Cryon 5. A shield for the allies who had bled beside them, and a statement to the galaxy that the promise did not end at Sol. The war was only beginning. The fires of battle still drifted across Earth's skies. Wreckage hung in orbit, twisted metal glowing faint as it tumbled into re-entry, burning like falling stars. Yet for all the scars, the solar system still stood, and the Bastion Dock had not fallen. Humanity had held the line. The first expeditionary armada limped back to harbor. The Warhawk and Valiant docked first, their hulls gutted but their crews alive, cheers echoing through every corridor as repair arms wrapped around them. The Aegis glowed faintly, her shields still humming, her resonance fields strained but unbroken. The Skuta V loomed proud, her armor charred but her spirit unshaken, her cannons still warm from endless fire. The Isabella drifted back into her cradle, her cloak field flickering faint after its final strike, her reactors drained but recovering. And then came the Razee. Her hangars were half empty, fighters lost to fire and glory. Her armor bore deep wounds where plasma had cut into her bones. Yet her engines burned steady, her great guns still smoking, her flag still raised. She had carried the promise through another storm. As she slid into her berth, teams of human engineers and cryon specialists swarmed her decks. But this time they were not only repairing, they were remaking. From the captured Zorith warships came treasure. Shield lattices ripped from their cores, weapons stripped from their broken flanks, reactor harmonics mapped and decoded. In the dock's forges, Cryon and Earth engineers fused it all together, creating something new. The first was the shield. No longer Earth's blunt fields, no longer Cryon's delicate harmonics, no longer Zorith's triphase lattice. Instead, an interlaced shield web, weaving all three technologies into a single defense. A wall that bent but did not break, that absorbed and dispersed, that could withstand fire no empire had ever tested. Every ship in the fleet received it, from the mighty Skuta V to the smallest escort. The second was the weaponry. Zorith plasma arrays were torn apart, rebuilt, and tuned to Earth's cadence. The Razee's broadside batteries were rebuilt with new conduits, their slugs now wrapped in plasma sheaths that burned hotter and cut deeper. The Skuta V's laser cannons were tuned with Zorith focusing crystals, their beams sharper, their range doubled. Even the Isabella's cloaked weapons grew stronger, her cannons now capable of striking through fields once thought impenetrable. And so the Razee was reborn. Not only as Earth's promise but as Earth's edge, the blade that would cut through anything the galaxy dared to throw against it. In Bastion Dock's council chamber, Space Force Command met with Cryon's chancellor, their voices carried across the stars. The decision was unanimous. A second Bastion-class fortress would be constructed above Cryon 5. Its guns would defend Earth's first ally, its shields would protect the frontier, and its presence would tell the galaxy that the promise was not bound to Sol. General Tudor stood with his marines in the docks bays, his armor scarred but his eyes steady. His voice carried across the ranks. "We've proven we can hold the ground. We've proven we can hold the sky. Wherever the promise takes us next, we will be there and we will not fail." And aboard the Razee, Admiral Buckrivers stood alone in the command deck, watching the void through armored glass. The fleet was stronger than ever. Earth was stronger than ever. The galaxy had seen their sword, had felt their shield, and had learned to fear their fire. But in the deep dark beyond the reach of Bastion's sensors, signals stirred. Fleets not Zorith, not Federation, but older, stranger, silent watchers who had seen empires rise and fall. They had seen the children of Earth stand against the storm, and they began to move. The promise had been kept. The sword had been drawn, and now the galaxy itself would answer. Stay tuned and follow along for the continuation of the Razee Saga.